What was something that happened to you as a child that you didn't realize was scary/creepy/dangerous until you got older? My family station wagon blew a flat in the middle of the night on I-95, as we exited the city of Miami. I was 5 years old and riding along with my mom, grandparent, sibling and dad, who was driving when the tire blew. It was the 80s. When the tire blew, everyone freaked out a bit. For some reason, my dad kept driving on the flat, even though we were traveling at a high speed. Eventually the tire wore down or fell off and we were riding on the rim, sparking down the freeway in the middle of the night. I remember the energy in the car turned to fear, but something was off. I was told when I was older, that my dad saw a man in the center median, throw a strip of nails attached to something into the middle of the highway, which my dad could not avoid. Turns out, people were using this method to rob and carjack highway drivers in the middle of the night. My dad somehow was aware of what was happening and responded accordingly by not stopping to change the tire for several miles. Luckily we had a full-size spare. We changed the tire several miles down the road and made it home safely. I had a kindergarten teacher who always gave me extra attention. He would bring me little gifts, hold my hand, walk me to the bathroom. After a few weeks my mom started asking me questions, and I told her how he would take me into the coat closet for special talks and would give me lots of hugs. My mom took me over to where my dad was working and had me tell him, and then we all drove up to the school and my dad beat the crap out of him. The next day I was put in a different classroom and I didn't see him at school anymore. When I was in 6th grade I walked into a math class for the first time at the start of the year and he was the teacher. It all just kind of clicked in my brain when I saw him, what he had done and might have tried to do and why my dad beat him up. Needless to say, I went to the principal and made them call my dad, and when they told us that, since nothing was ever done legally and all that, he would keep teaching, and he was the only math teacher. My dad put me in a different school. I was going to a friend's house which was at the end of a road. When I was walking down to his house there was this white van that was driving besides me very slowly. The driver was sitting on the passenger seat with one hand on the door and the other on the wheel. I didn't think it was that suspicious at the time, so I kept walking, and as I turned the corner into the dead end of the road the van sped up, turned around and drove off. At that time I didn't realize what he was planning on doing. Now I realize that he was planning on looping around at the dead end until he got to me, and because he was on the passenger side, all he had to do was open the door and pull me in and then just drive off. But this didn't happen, because at the time he turned the corner, a family was playing outside of their front garden, and if it wasn't for them I would have been kidnapped. Once, when I was younger, I was running through the woods playing with sticks. I was about 6 or 7. As I was playing throughout the woods with any stick I could find, I saw a man in the distance. I didn't think anything of it, since I was out there, why not him? But he just stood there. For the entire summer, I would run up there and play. We had about 10 acres, so while not a lot, in all honesty this guy shouldn't have been on the property, but I never thought to speak up. Every single day, I would see him standing, same spot, same time. Never moving. Eventually, while playing, I decided to ask if he wanted to join. I ran up to him and said, "Mister, do you want to play pretend with me?" He looked down and smiled, and just said he didn't want to interrupt me, but was really interested in joining in on the fun. Just before we could start to play, my mom called out for me for lunch. I turned around and said I was coming and bringing a friend. When I turned away to invite him down, he wasn't there. I never saw him again, and my mom still doesn't know who I was talking about when I said I'd invite my friend. She chalked it up to my imagination. I was about 7 and my brother was 13 and we still shared a room. I was always afraid of the dark when I was a kid. Periodically I would wake up in the night and call for Mom to come and turn on the hall light to be used as a night light. Much to the enjoyment of my brother. One night in the middle of winter I woke up, and right before I called out for Mom I noticed there was a man on the deck that was on the other side of the wall from our bedroom. I froze. I was totally freaked and tried to scream, but I could only make this high-pitched squeaking sound. The only thing I could do was cry. After what seemed like hours my dad heard me and came in to see what was wrong. The man was gone of course when I told him, and he blew it off as a nightmare until my brother, from under his covers, said that he saw it too. With that my dad went outside with a shotgun. There were footprints in the snow outside our window and the window of my parents' bedroom. That one took a while to recover from. This was in the early 70s. When I was 6 or so, I was playing in the basement with my 3-year-old brother. There was an oil storage tank there and an old refrigerator, the type with the handle to close the door. Well, we put each other in the refrigerator, imagining it was a rocket ship, and we would let each other out. Finally, I went into the refrigerator with a kitten for some reason. I called my brother to let me out, He called back that he was stuck behind the oil tank. So, I tried to get out of the refrigerator, but it locks from the outside, and there was no way to open it from the inside. After several minutes, it starts getting warm in the refrigerator, and I start to get a little tired. I start caressing the kitten, and tell him that we'd be okay. A few minutes later, someone from upstairs comes down to look for us. My brother tells him that I'm in the refrigerator and he opens the door to let me out. I was probably about 5 minutes away from suffocating. I don't know who my rescuer was. My parents were having a party upstairs, and had many guests. I think he was a friend of my older brother, who would have been 17 at the time. My parents never mentioned the incident, so I don't know if they ever found out. One time when I was about 9 or 10, I was with a bunch of friends and we were having a Nerf war outside. We ended up in one of the neighbors' yards, who apparently was a decent chef. He comes out and tells us he had this small shed in his backyard and that we could all hang out in it if we wanted to. We kind of felt weird about it, but after thinking about it we decided to give it a look. We went in and it was a small shed with a bed in the back. We decided to start bringing stuff and actually set up a TV and a GameCube in there. Anyway, about 2 years later, this dude has 4 cops raiding his house. I live in a super small town by the way, so this is the most action in years. One even went through the back with a shotgun. Turns out he beat his wife and was holding her hostage. I still see him driving around the town every so often. My mom put me to bed in my room, but I woke up downstairs. I thought it was a dream, but some man picked me up when I was almost asleep, carried me downstairs and put me down on some blankets between a sofa and chair. I was quite young, so my parents still had a safety gate. My dad wasn't home because he worked night shift, and my mom was asleep, so no one knows how I managed to get downstairs. I can still remember this now, strangely. Similar story here. I remember one night my parents tucking me into bed and I remember falling asleep. I even remember waking up from a dream laughing that night. It was a good dream. But some point after that I woke up in my backyard laying in my shed. The creepy thing is we had an alarm system that would make a loud ring whenever a door opened in my house. I never heard it go off and neither did my parents or siblings. It was impossible for me to get out of the house that night without waking up my entire family. My family was quite shaken by this and it scares me till this day. A relative was in the hospital and I didn't want to go in, so my parents let me stay in the car. A woman was in the car next to ours waiting in the driver's seat. A man walked up to her car door and pulled it open. I was young enough not to remember why we were at the hospital, but what he said to her is still clear in my memory. "You're gonna drive me back to your place, and we're gonna fuck." I remember her yelling something along the lines of, "What the fuck? No." And then they started fighting. I got scared and hid where your feet go in the back seat, really not wanting this man to see me. Eventually I heard the car leave. I have no idea what happened and I never told my parents. When I told a friend, he said he was probably her family member and she was crazy. That discouraged me from telling anyone. He wasn't there and didn't hear the man's vicious tone and the woman's terrified one. When I was a kid, there was a guy in my neighborhood who everyone called Beagle Man. He lived on this weird little side street with only 2 houses on it, his trailer and the burned out shell of what used to be a nice house. The rumor was that he kept a pack of beagles locked up in rabbit hutches in his front yard, and if you trespassed on his property, he'd release the dogs, hunt you down, and kill you. Fun stuff. Obviously I had to check it out. I walked over to Beagle Man's house alone and snooped around his yard. Just like the rumor said, there were rabbit hutches crammed full of dogs everywhere. I decided that I was going to go home and make my parents call animal control, so I went to leave when all of a sudden, I heard the sound of a pump-action shotgun and a man's voice growl, "What the fuck are you doing here?" Turned around. Saw Beagle Man standing on his porch with a shotgun and 2 beagles. I ran as fast as I could. He set the dogs on me and chased me for what felt like forever. He discharged the shotgun a few times, yelling at me for straying onto his property. It was scary at the time, but I didn't realize that A, I legitimately could have been killed, and B, that he was abusing those poor dogs until many years later. I did tell my parents what happened though, and they immediately called the cops. Beagle Man was arrested and all of the dogs were surrendered to ASPCA custody. When I was about 11 or 12, my friend, same age, invited me over to this guy's house. He was about 30, fat neckbeard, fedora type. He said he was a video game tester and got games early for Dreamcast and had a souped up Sega Genesis that played games extra fast. Anyways, he took us into his basement of an apartment complex, where he had a pallet with a bunch of Playboys on it in his storage unit. He let us grab a few and we went back up to his place. He then said we could keep them but only if we jacked off first. First he wanted us to do it by him, then he said we could do it in the bathroom, and to just show him the cum to prove it. At that point I was weirded out and I said we had to go. I think my friend went back a few times and I never really thought too much about it, but now it's really terrible. I was out at our cabin in the remote mountainous wilderness of Colorado with my dad, and had to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. This necessitated a flashlight and shoes, because the outhouse was far away. There was no one but me and my dad for miles in any direction. So I thought. I suddenly heard voices in the distance and stopped in my tracks. It seemed to be coming from my right, deep in the woods in the middle of nowhere, a quarter of a mile from the road. Being 11 and unafraid of the world, I foolishly yelled, "Who's out there?" There was silence for a few seconds, then a shouted string of profanity so vulgar it terrified my virgin ears. I stood stock still for a moment like a terrified rabbit but heard nothing else, so I ran back to the house and woke my dad up. He got up, loaded his gun, and turned all the lights on, but we never heard another sound. To this day, we have not seen or heard another person within 15 miles of the cabin. Haven't told this one in a while. I was young, 5 to 7, somewhere in there. I was sleeping in between my parents for whatever reason. I woke up. I remember the clock reading around 4 a.m. There was something standing by the window, looking out into the front yard. It looked like a man in a brown wool robe, about 6 feet 4 inches or so. I started to stir and sat up in bed, and the thing turned and looked at me. Dear God, that face. Extremely pale white skin, lots of really pronounced wrinkles, and the face drooped like it was melting, down into a really pointy chin, almost similar to a scream mask but with all of the features of a living being. Its mouth was hanging open and its eyes were wide, almost like it was worried or frightened. It kept its gaze on me while it moved away from the window, in front of the bed, and out the open bedroom door. The second it exited the room, the lights turned on their own and both of my parents jumped up on either side of me, breathing heavily like they'd both just woken up from a nightmare. To be clear, I was fully able to move during this. I don't think it was sleep paralysis, but I'm not sure what it could have been other than some kind of demon or really fucking ugly ghost. I've never seen it since, but I can still picture it clear as day. A man pointed a gun at me when I was 6. I was in the backyard playing when 2 men walked by. I don't remember any details of their appearances, just silhouettes. They stopped and one of them aimed a pistol at me. I didn't feel any fear, but I almost nonchalantly stepped behind the nearest bush, like I knew what a gun was from TV, but didn't really grasp the idea of death as something that could actually happen to me. One of them said, "Ah, never mind," or something in a similar tone, and they walked away. This might be a little long. When I was still a toddler, around 3 or so, my mom and dad took my sister, 10 years old, and I on a trip to Toronto. We were towing a small trailer and I guess it got a flat. For some reason my parents unhooked the trailer, spread a blanket and left my sister and I to watch it while they drove to a repair shop. Note, we were on the 401 highway, which is a divided, 70 miles per hour, at the time, speed limit 4-lane freeway. There couldn't have been a repair shop for 60 or more miles. They took off for what seemed like hours. Could have been. I was 3. So we are sitting there and a station wagon pulls to the shoulder and comes to a stop. By the time I noticed, a middle-aged man had scooted to the passenger side of his car, opened the door and was whacking it for all it's worth. I just stared at him because I was curious and my sister said, "Don't look and he'll go away." I thought she said, "Don't look or he'll go away." So I pretended to cover my eyes and stared through my fingers because I thought she wanted him to stay. In any case, he finally finished up and left but came back after a fair while. He must have taken the next off-ramp and doubled back because he showed back up again doing the same thing. By then, I had figured out my sister was afraid, so I tried not to look as much. Edit, I should have mentioned that I am female. He must have left, and after a long time my parents came back for us. That part is all hazy. I just remember the weird man. At no point was I frightened because of my trust in my sister. When we got home and we went out to play, I told all her friends that I saw a man, stretching his dink. Which they found hilarious. I only realized many years later how much danger we were in and how irresponsible my parents were. All I can think now is, my poor sister. I guess my fuck up is implicitly trusting my dad. I am however thankful for the fact that I wore him down while begging for him to let me take my cousin home with us. I was 9 and my cousin was 12. This was in 1994. I live on an island where there used to be a lot of mining until 1966 and up until 2005. You could drive these sometimes single-lane cliff-back roads through the woods to go from town to town, or in my dad's logic, You could drive and drive with no roadblocks like on the highway. He loads up his pickup truck with us kids and sets off down the back road from Great Central Lake. After promising my uncle he would take the highway back and 20 minutes down, he cracks a beer. I was completely oblivious at the time as to what alcohol really does, but my cousin wasn't. She paid more attention to the road than he did, and these roads are sketchy as fuck thinking back on them. At one point the road really narrows into a single lane on a cliff over a lake. This is the point where I realized that we were in danger because I had been looking out the window and saw that 3/4 of our front tire were no longer on any ground, and the ground I did see was slowly disappearing into the lake. At this point my cousin hears my panic whimpering, and with a quick glance and no hesitation she grabs the steering wheel and forces the truck left a little more, until we're now scraping the cliff a bit but now have 4 tires on the ground. She flipped her shit, threw his beer out of the window and forced him to drive slow for the next grueling hour and a half home. I don't think I drove anywhere with my dad for another 10 years, and when I did he scratched 2 vehicles trying to park. I don't know if I can really chalk up his lack of sense to just his age. He is 42 years older than I. I think it's the alcohol that makes him dumb and he just won't stop. I never had this happen to me, but there was a weird tradition in the school district I went to. I do not know how far spread this was. If anyone else has heard of it, please let me know. Our school was arranged K-6th grades in one building. Grades 7 to 9 were termed junior high, and then high school was grades 10 to 12. The last day of school before summer break was called Scrub Day. It was a fucked up hazing ritual where older boys would invade the grade school vicinity and attack the 6th graders who would be 7th graders. They would tackle the kid and smear lipstick all over them. Mud and dog poop was also used. Mostly faces and arms, but clothing was ruined and 6th graders were told to wear old clothes that day. I hated it. I was always scared. As the scrubbers were not too picky about what age kid was that they were attacking. A few kids thought it was funny, but most kids ended up bloody as well as lipsticked. My mom escorted me home, but it was tense as hell before she showed up. 5th grade was a bad year with probably 50 or more older kids chasing down wailing 12-year-old kids on the playground and basketball courts. I really do not know why this was ever tolerated. The 60s was a crazy time. My 6th grade year was the last year it happened. A 3rd grade girl was assaulted, they scrubbed her everywhere, and did other things that I won't say. The shit hit the fan, and Scrub Day was a thing of the past. I was visiting my auntie in Sydney, Australia. At the time I was 4 years old and it was summer, so we were on the beach and it was hot. If anyone knows beaches in Australia, there are hundreds of people playing in the water edge. Because it was the 80s, kids played without care and parents kept a loose eye on what they were doing, and on this day I was playing at the water edge with 2 family friends, both girls aged 4 and 6. Long story short, a man approached us and said he had something cool to show us in the caves and rock pools around the corner of the bay. As a kid this was awesome, so we followed him. Our parents were watching the water's edge and 3 kids they thought was us. We followed the guy to the cave and he told me and one of the girls to wait outside while he took the 6-year-old into the cave. He molested her and then got spooked when he heard people searching for us. After that, all I remember is doing facial recognition with the police and getting Burger King, which was sweet. Looking back, I could have been raped at the age of 4. Scary as hell when I think about it as an adult. I grew up in Detroit, and because violence was the norm I didn't realize how terrible some of the stuff I witnessed was. I even thought, cool, a good story to tell the kids at school. One particular story is of when my neighbors across the street, a couple and the sister of the couple, got into a very violent fight. There was so much blood, the husband or boyfriend was beating his lady and kicking her all over her porch. Then when her sister came home midway, she's like, hell no, and gets a 2x4 from the alley and starts beating the crap out of the guy. He leaves and gets something else and starts beating her, and the girlfriend is just trying to break it up, but she's getting hit and they're all really beaten up. I lived with my grandparents, these sweet old classic Mexican types from the country, and we just all go sit on the porch and watch what the crazy white trash neighbors are doing, and it never occurred to me to call 911 or do anything. When the cops came, I remember thinking that calling them was a good idea. If you guys like this video, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe. Also check out my Instagram account, Scary Time, that is linked in the description. And as always, stay scary.